The first time I failed, I was sitting on a wooden chair in my own kitchen, 6 weeks after giving birth to my daughter, with 3 older women watching me try to lift a cast-iron pot off the stove. My hands were shaking, my back ached in a way I couldn't describe, and the oldest woman, my husband's grandmother, leaned over to my mother-in-law and said something in Pennsylvania Dutch I wasn't supposed to hear, but I heard it. She said, "She's not ready. He chose poorly." I was 20 years old. I had been a mother for 42 days. And in that moment, sitting in the kitchen I had scrubbed clean that morning, holding a pot I could barely lift, I understood that everything I had done since my wedding day was being measured, and I was failing. Before I tell you what that test was, what the second one looked like 2 years later, and why I eventually walked away from the only world I had ever known, let me introduce myself. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I share the truths my community would never let me say out loud. If you want to understand what Amish life is actually like behind the bonnets and buggies, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it tells me you want more of these stories. And in the comments below, tell me, did you know that Amish wives are tested after childbirth? I read every single one. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Let me explain what most people outside our world don't understand. In Amish communities, a wedding doesn't make you a wife. Not really. It makes you a bride. And there's a difference. The wedding ceremony is the beginning of your evaluation, not the end of it. You're being watched from the moment you say your vows, and the watching never really stops. But there's one specific window when the watching becomes intense, formal, and absolutely consequential. That window is the 6 weeks after you give birth to your first child. In my old order district in Lancaster County, we called it Die Wushabet, the week bed. Officially, it's a period of rest. 6 weeks where the new mother stays mostly indoors, recovers from childbirth, and bonds with her baby. That's the version you'll read in tourist books. That's the version the bishop describes if an outsider ever asks. But the real version, the one every Amish woman knows in her bones, is something else entirely. It's a test. And the people grading you are the older women in your husband's family. Here's how it works. During those 6 weeks, female relatives rotate through your home. Your mother-in-law comes first. Then your husband's grandmothers, his aunts, his older sisters. They bring food, they hold the baby, they wash your dishes. To an outsider, it looks like beautiful community support, and in some ways it is. But while they're in your home, they're observing everything. How clean is your kitchen? How quickly does your milk come in? Does the baby cry too much? Does the baby cry too little? Are you healing well, or are you complaining? Are you grateful, or are you proud? Is your husband still respected when he walks into a room, or has marriage softened him? Every observation gets reported back, not in a meeting, not officially, but in whispers at quilting bees, at church meals, in the buggy on the way home from a wedding. By the time the 6 weeks ends, the verdict is in. And the verdict shapes your standing in the community for the rest of your life. I didn't know any of this when I married Jonas. I was 19. He was 22. We had courted for 7 months, and I thought I understood what was coming. Cooking, cleaning, raising children, attending church every other Sunday. I was prepared for the work. Nobody told me about the test. Nobody told me what they were measuring or how to pass. My daughter was born in late March on a cold Tuesday morning. The midwife came at 3 a.m., and by sunrise I was a mother. Jonas held the baby first. Then his mother arrived from down the road. She had been waiting. By that afternoon, my own mother came too, and the 2 grandmothers stood on opposite sides of my bed like sentries, both smiling, both watching. The first week I was too exhausted to notice anything but the baby. She nursed constantly. She slept in short bursts. My body felt like it had been broken open and put back together wrong. My mother-in-law came every morning at 6. She cleaned my kitchen before I was even out of bed. She made breakfast for Jonas. She folded the laundry I hadn't gotten to. And every morning she would stand in my doorway holding a cup of coffee and say in that gentle voice that had a knife inside it, "How are we feeling today, Martha?" We. Not you. We. I learned later that this was a signal. The we meant she was speaking for the family. The we meant my answer was being recorded. If I said I was tired, I was weak. If I said I was fine, I was lying, and lying was worse than weakness. The correct answer, the answer I didn't know existed, was something like, "The Lord is good. The baby slept well. Jonas had a hot breakfast." A deflection. An offering. Praise for everyone except yourself. I didn't know the script. So week after week I gave the wrong answers. By week 3 I noticed something shifting. The visits became shorter, the smiles became thinner. My sister-in-law Rebecca, who had been kind to me at my wedding, stopped staying for coffee. My mother-in-law started bringing her own dish rag from home, as if mine wasn't clean enough. Jonas came home one evening and asked me very quietly if everything was all right between me and his mother. I said yes. He said, "She thinks you're struggling." I said, "I just had a baby." He looked at the floor for a long time and then said, "She thinks you're not grateful." That word, grateful. In Amish culture, gratitude isn't a feeling, it's a performance. And I had been failing the performance for 3 weeks without even knowing the curtain was up. Week 6 was the formal close. 3 women came to my house on a Saturday afternoon. My mother-in-law, her mother, and Jonas's father's sister, who was the oldest woman in his family, and held the most weight. They brought a pie. They held the baby. They asked me to make coffee. And while I moved around the kitchen, trying to lift the cast-iron pot I had been lifting since I was 12 years old, my hands shook, my back screamed. And I heard the great-grandmother say those words, "He chose poorly." If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. I did not cry that night. I did not cry the next week. I waited until Jonas was at the barn one evening, and then I sat on the floor of our bedroom, and I wept into the hem of my apron so the baby wouldn't hear. I wept because I had failed something I didn't know I was being graded on. I wept because my own mother had not warned me. I wept because the women who were supposed to welcome me into their family had instead spent 6 weeks measuring me with a ruler I couldn't see. When my second baby came 2 years later, I thought I knew better. I had studied the older women in my church district. I had watched how Rebecca, who had passed her own weekbed test brilliantly, deflected every question. I had memorized phrases. "The Lord is good." "Jonas had a hot breakfast." "The baby is a blessing." I rehearsed them like prayers. My son was born in June. The weekbed began the next morning. My mother-in-law arrived at 6, and I was ready. For the first 3 weeks I performed beautifully. I gave her the deflections. I praised Jonas at every meal. I never said I was tired. I never said the baby had cried for 4 hours the night before. I smiled until my face hurt. But here's what I didn't understand. The test isn't only words. It's also the body. And my body after my second birth was not healing the way it had the first time. I had what an English doctor would later tell me was a postpartum complication that needed actual medical care. But in the weekbed, you don't see a doctor. You see the midwife who delivered you, and only if she's already coming. You don't complain. You don't ask for help. You endure. By week 4, I was bleeding more than I should have been. I knew it. I didn't say it. I was so determined to pass the test that I let my body break down rather than fail again. One afternoon, I fainted in the kitchen with the baby in my arms. My mother-in-law caught him before he hit the floor. The midwife came that evening. She told me I needed to rest, really rest, and that if the bleeding didn't slow, I would need to go to the hospital in town. An Amish woman going to an English hospital during the weekbed is a kind of public failure. Everyone would know, everyone would talk. I went. I had to. And when I came home 3 days later, the verdict was already in. I had failed the second test even worse than the first. Not because I had been ungrateful this time, but because I had been too proud to ask for help when my body needed it. That's what they decided. Not that the system had no room for honesty. Not that the test itself made it impossible to admit weakness. They decided I had been proud. Hochmut, the greatest sin. The whispers started at the next church Sunday. I felt them before I heard them. The older women didn't sit near me at the meal. The younger women didn't ask me to hold their babies. Rebecca, my sister-in-law, who had been warming back up to me, cooled again. And Jonas, my Jonas, who had built our bed with his own hands, and who had whispered to me on our wedding night that he didn't know what he was doing either, Jonas began to look at me differently. Not with cruelty, with disappointment, which is worse. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. I want to be very clear about something here because I know how this sounds. The women who tested me were not evil women. My mother-in-law was not a villain. She had been tested too, decades earlier, by her own mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law had been tested before that. The weak bed evaluation is not something one cruel woman invented. It's a system that has been passed down through generations of women who all survived it themselves and who genuinely believe it makes the community stronger. They believe a wife who can't pass it will struggle later. They believe the test is a kindness. They believe they are protecting the family. But here's what I've learned since I left. A system that tests a woman at her most physically and emotionally vulnerable moment, when her body is still bleeding from childbirth, when her hormones are rewriting her brain, when she hasn't slept more than 2 hours in a row in weeks, that system is not measuring her worth. It's measuring her ability to perform under conditions designed to break her, and then it punishes her for breaking. I knew an Amish woman in our district named Anna. She had 3 children, and she passed her weak bed test all 3 times. She was held up in our community as the model of what a young wife should be: calm, grateful, strong. Years later, after I had left, I found out that Anna had spent 2 decades on a kind of homemade nerve tonic that she made from herbs in her garden, because the only way she had survived those 3 weak beds was by quietly numbing herself for 6 weeks at a time, the model wife, the one we were all supposed to imitate. She had passed the test by chemically removing herself from her own body, and I think about the women who don't pass. Not just me, there were others in our district. A woman named Esther who failed her first week bed and was quietly considered a disappointment for the next 30 years. A woman named Lydia whose husband was told by his father that he should have waited longer to marry. A woman named Katie, my own cousin, who failed her week bed so badly that her mother-in-law moved into her home for an extra month afterward to help, which everyone understood meant to teach her the lessons she should have already learned. Failing the week bed doesn't get you shunned. It's not that public. It's quieter than that. It just changes how you're spoken to for the rest of your life. The older women correct you a little more. Your husband's family invites you a little less. Your children, when they grow up, hear the whispers about their mother and absorb them. The cost is invisible from the outside and inescapable from the inside. I left when my daughter was 4 and my son was 2. Jonas did not come with me. He had loved me, I believe, but he could not love a wife the community had marked. The shunning was immediate. My mother returned my letters unopened. My father came to the bus station once, stood 20 feet away from me, and did not speak. He left without looking back. I held my children, and I got on the bus, and I started over. In therapy, 3 years later, I learned a phrase that changed my life. My therapist told me, "Martha, what you're describing is not a tradition. It's a control mechanism wearing the costume of a tradition." I sat with that sentence for weeks, because the weak bed had always been described to me as care, as community, as the women of the family wrapping their arms around the new mother. And in some ways, in the warmest moments, it really was that. But underneath the warmth was always the watching, and the watching was never about love. It was about whether I deserved to belong. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. My daughter is 14 now. My son is 12. They will never lie in a wuchabet. They will never have 3 women rotate through their kitchen counting their failures. When my daughter has children someday, if she chooses to, I will sit beside her, and I will hold her hand, and I will say the words my own mother never said to me. "You are doing well. You are tired, and that is allowed. You are not being graded. You are becoming a mother, and that is enough. I want to say something to anyone watching this who grew up in a community, Amish or not, where womanhood was a test you didn't know you were taking, where the kindness of older women was always tied to your performance, where you learned to say the right words before you ever learned to feel the real ones. I see you. I know what it cost you to read those rooms. I know how tired you are from a lifetime of being measured. Your worth is not a score. Your body is not a report card. Your exhaustion after bringing a child into the world is not a character flaw. The women who tested you were tested too, and the women before them, and the women before them, and somewhere far back in the chain, somebody decided that a wife had to earn her place in her own family by performing through her own pain. That somebody was wrong. Quietly, generationally, devastatingly wrong. I failed the week bed twice. I am not ashamed anymore. I failed a test that should never have existed. And the day I finally understood that, the day I stopped trying to pass, was the day I began to actually become the woman I am now. Not a graded wife. Just a person, tired and healing and free. If this story moved you, leave me a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me if you grew up with a test like this in your own life, in any form, in any culture. I want to hear your story. And if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There's so much more I haven't said yet. If you want to go deeper, the full Amish Insider Guide is in the description. Until next time, your worth was never up for measurement. Choose your freedoms wisely.